To give us more perspective in terms of what this, of course, means for the people in France, we are being joined by Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, who is joining us live from Paris. She's a columnist at the London Telegraph. Ms. Moutet, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. The question that is now going to be asked in France is, what next? Will these protests die down, or will we see continued protests, despite the fact that the Constitutional Court has now upheld these pension changes brought in by Emmanuel Macron?
I think the protests will redouble, because it's not just that the Constitutional Council passed the bill that to some extent was expected. It's the fact that there was a request for a shared initiative referendum, which is a French constitutional system whereby if you've got at least 1/5 of MPs asking for this, it opens the right for the people to hold a referendum, and they have 9 months to gather 4.7 million votes for or against the bill in question. The Constitutional Council said technically this was not legal, and therefore they refused to call for the referendum. The French know perfectly well that a large majority, possibly twice as many at least, people would actually vote during those 9 months. And in the meantime, of course, that would have put Emmanuel Macron in a very bad situation, because there would have been this sort of ongoing popular campaign in the country for 9 months, during which he would have had to suspend his bill. And I think there's a great deal of anger. There is also a second group of MPs who requested a separate referendum, so that's going to happen yet again in a few days. And quite frankly, I think the country has just seen the beginning of its sort of trouble in the streets.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, what does it do for the image of Emmanuel Macron? He's, in fact, gone out on a limb for these pension changes. It's at this moment difficult to predict as to how many people in France, in fact, go on and support it in case Emmanuel Macron were to, of course, go to the public on this particular issue. But the fact that France has witnessed sustained protests on this issue for so many last weeks from a whole variety of trade unions across the country is something that Emmanuel Macron will be looking at very closely. But what does it do for him politically?
Politically, it is disastrous, because when the protests started, that was in January and February, so you had 2 months, i.e. 8 days of action in which people went on strike and people marched, and the first 2 months were completely calm. Actually, there was less violence than there has been in demonstrations in France for several years, and you had the union's security system that prevented people from breaking stuff, looting stuff, what you've seen on television since. After 2 months, there was enough anger that there were enough protesters that came at the tail end or just before the demonstrations, and they started the stuff that you've seen, and the cycle of violence with the demonstrators breaking stuff, the police answering, and that sort of thing. And
right.
That was so because Emmanuel Macron would not speak to the unions for all that time. He still has not met with the union leaders after 4 months.
Absolutely, indeed. Ms. Moutet, do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, I'm told that we're also being joined by our correspondent, Sarah Coates, who's joining us from Paris with all the updates. Now, Sarah, this, of course, is a pretty crucial verdict that, of course, has come through, where the pension changes pushed through by Emmanuel Macron have been upheld. What are you picking up from the public? What is the mood within the public like out there, the people who've been protesting against these pension changes? WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.